Let's all go to Isaiah chapter 29, which I will now refer to as the second most quoted chapter of Isaiah, which I didn't know that when I started this. But Isaiah chapter 29 is just chock full, as you can see up here on the board, chock full of New Testament references back, and many that we know very well. And there's a reason for that, as we'll see tonight. In fact, there's a tremendous amount of parallel between what was going on during this time of Isaiah under King Hezekiah and where the people were and what was about to happen to them, and also then what happened after Jesus left and what was going on with the people at that time and during the early church, and actually some parallels with what will happen at the end of time. And we're just going to see kind of what the problems were, but also the tremendous amount of hope that they had, that God was still in control. So let's get to it. Let's all turn in our Bibles to Isaiah chapter 29, and we'll see first of all the woe. And by the way, and when a prophet comes to you and says, "Woe unto you," you ought to listen. In fact, who went around saying woe to some people when he was around? Jesus liked to say that too. And here we have a woe. In Isaiah chapter 29, verse 1, "Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add ye year to year, let them kill sacrifices, yet I will distress Ariel. And there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel." And of course, what's your first question? Who's this Ariel? Who's Ariel, and why do we keep talking about her? Well, it's not the Little Mermaid. It has nothing to do with that at all. In fact, Ariel just basically means Lion of God, which is kind of interesting that he would sit here and call them a Lion of God while at the same time saying what? Woe to you. Doesn't it sound good to be called the Lion of God? Lion seems strength, right? And God? So he is strength, yet even as he calls them Ariel, he says to them, "Woe unto you. You may think you are strong. You may think you are a lion. You may think that you have pleasure from God, but you are what? In distress. Because I will distress you, and I will bring heaviness and sorrow." And again, what are they doing wrong? Are they doing the sacrifices? Is the temple up and running? Are they having the regular prayers? Are they having the sacrifices? In fact, yes, he says what? Let them kill sacrifices. It's not going to be any good. Because while they were very religious and they had a king sitting on the throne in Hezekiah, who was a good king, and encouraged the people to seek God, right? He was a good example to them, and the priests were operating, and the Levites were doing their job, and they were going through it. The problem was, as in the beginning of the book of Isaiah, what is always the problem? They were just going through the motions. They were doing it as a cultural thing, as a religious thing. They were going through the motions, and he says to them, "Woe unto you," verse 3, "and I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against you with a mount, and I will raise forts against you." Notice the pronoun. What's the pronoun? I. I, God, will do this. Now, will it be actually God going and building the forts and laying siege and putting up a mount against Israel, against Jerusalem? No. But he's the one that uses, right? He's the one that decides. He's the one that brings judgment. And he will, in fact, use Assyria to do it this time. By the way, anybody want to guess who he's going to use this time? Rome. So he will use whoever he needs to use, won't he, to bring siege. Which brings us to the question, why? What's wrong? In fact, let's look quickly at Luke chapter 23, and let's see the woe that Jesus said at his time. Luke chapter 23. And this is as he's going to the cross. So Jesus has been beaten, he's been humiliated, he's been mocked. He is now carrying his cross, or somebody's carrying it for him at this point. And he's headed where? To Calvary. He's headed to Golgotha. And he says here, and starting in verse 27, and there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in the which they will say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and the hills cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall they be done in a dry? And he's basically saying, hey, there's woe coming on you. He even said at one point, I would have loved to take you to Jerusalem. I would have loved to gather you under my wings and protect you, but you rejected me. And by the way, if they are willing in a green time, when Jesus Christ is with them, and they're willing to put him to death, what's going to happen after he's gone? And it's going to be destruction. And Jerusalem, he says, don't cry for me. Cry for yourselves because of what's going on today, because of the judgment, because of what's going to happen, and their rejection, not just of Christ here, but of Christianity and of the Word and of the truth, that woe to you. Right? So there's a woe, but why? Again, weren't they religious enough? Isn't religion enough? Isn't going to church and giving sacrifices and giving your money and doing this and doing that, isn't that good enough? God says what? No. In fact, what was his judgment against them? Let's go back to Isaiah 29 and see what he says starting in verse 9. Isaiah 29:9. He says, Stay yourselves and wonder. Cry ye out and cry. They are drunken, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink. For the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers, the seers, hath been what? Covered. And the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. I don't know how to read. And basically what he's saying is the problem is you're what? You're blind. You take it to those who are wise, who should know. You give it to them and say, we can't understand this. It's sealed. It's sealed. You cannot know. You cannot learn. You cannot understand this. It is sealed. Then you take it to somebody else who says, I can understand it. Oh, wait, but I can't read. And they are blind to the truth. And they cannot see what is right before them. Because let's face it, how long by this point, time of Hezekiah, has Isaiah been giving them the same message? It's been about 30, 40 years. Is that a long time, by the way? For somebody to keep pounding on the same message over and over and over. Somebody asked me, how long have I been here? I said, I've been here as pastor 20 years. And I've got to say, the message hasn't changed. But for some people, it's what? I don't want to hear it. It's beyond our comprehension. There's no way we can access it. Or I just don't understand it. I can't learn that. I can't know the truth. What does God say? Oh, yeah, you can. It's open. It's an open book, and I will help you know it. Yes, you can know the truth, but you are what? Blind. In fact, let's go to Romans chapter 11. Let's go to the time of Paul writing to the Christians in Rome. Romans chapter 11, verse 8. We'll go ahead and start in verse 7, just to kind of lead up to it. Romans chapter 11, verse 7, he writes about Israel and says, What then? Israel hath not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election hath obtained it, and the rest were what? Blinded. Israel did not receive what is supposed to because they were blind. According as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear unto this day. What is he referring back to? He's referring back to what? Isaiah said this. He's saying, hey, they have eyes, but they don't see. They should be awake. They should be seeing, but instead they slumber, and they do not understand, and they are altogether what? Blind to the truth. Is that going on today, by the way? Is the truth available? Is it being preached? Is it being taught? Is it available? Yet Satan continues to blind. And right here during the time that Paul writes this in Romans, what's going on in Israel? They were blind. They continued to sleep. They continued to slumber. Continued to say, we do not understand. Even though Christ had already come, hadn't he? In fact, let's go to verse 13, back in Isaiah 29. Blindness was a problem, being asleep, not being able to understand, not seeking to understand. But also in Isaiah chapter 29, verse 13. What else was their problem? Isaiah 29:13. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth. If you just walked down the streets of Jerusalem and said, do you believe in God? What they have said? Yes. Does God need to wash away your sins? What would they say? Yeah, I take my sacrifices. Yeah. Do you believe, the Messiah is coming? What would they have said? Oh, absolutely. Do you love God? Absolutely. Do you serve God? Absolutely. That's their mouth, though. What can the mouth say? Anything. What is God more concerned about? They draw near with the mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precepts of man. Honor and respect and service to me has been taken away from the heart and put into a 10 easy step program, right? And mankind has decided what is right and what is wrong, and what does it mean to serve God, what it means to obey God, instead of serving and obeying from their what? Heart. Everything we do for God should be motivated by one thing and one thing only, the love that is in our heart for Him. Not because of what everybody else says or what everybody else thinks we should do or what the church even teaches us to do. It's because what? We love God. And He said, that's missing. Yes, you're bringing your sacrifices. He said at the very first chapter of Isaiah, you're doing your new moons, you're doing your festivals, you're doing all these things, but your heart is far from me. Knock it off. Don't do it if you're not going to do it because you love me. And was there any difference between that and when Jesus came? Let's go to Matthew chapter 15. Was the temple open when Jesus walked the streets of Jerusalem? Were they doing sacrifices? Were they celebrating the Sabbath and the festival of booths? They were doing all those. They were doing all the festivals. They were doing all the things. Did they have a chief priest in place? Did they have the Pharisees teaching the law? Did they have synagogues open in the cities around about, teaching the Word of God? Did they have all those things? By the way, do you think they were teaching Isaiah 29? Yet Jesus said about them what? Chapter 15, verse 7. You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honor me with their lips, but their heart is from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of what? Men. What spurred such words from Jesus? Well, back up to chapter 15, verse 1. Then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, Ariel, saying, why do thy disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. Here you have God in the flesh teaching them about their own lacking, about their own sin, about their own greed, about all the problems that they have. He's teaching them, and they're sitting there going, but those guys aren't washing their hands. They don't serve God. You don't serve God. If you don't tell them to wash their hands, you're not serving God either. You don't serve God as well as we do. And what does Jesus say? Oh, it's not about washing hands. It's about what? The heart. Are you serving God, or are you just checking lists of things that you should be doing because men have said so? And he says, your heart is far from me. And that was a problem. Let's not get in our head that somehow there was a lot of idol worship going on when Jesus was around. There wasn't. But what they were doing, God hated. in times of Isaiah and in times of Jesus, because they weren't doing it with their heart, were they? And what else? Let's go to chapter 29 again, verse 14. Isaiah chapter 29, verse 14. So because of their blindness, because of their heart problem, he says, verse 14, "Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder." Now that sounds good, doesn't it? Oh, God's going to do a wonder. God's going to do something marvelous. He's going to destroy. Kind of. We'll get to that in a minute. But he's going to do something amazing, something to try to jolt them back into a relationship with him. Because why? "For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid." Because there aren't any wise men anymore. There aren't any prudent men. And if they say something, who's listening? Nobody will listen to them. Nobody will listen to the wise men and the prudent men. In fact, those who speak the truth are considered what? In error. They just want to hear what they want to hear. In fact, look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 19. Again, from Paul, from early in the church. First Corinthians chapter 1, let's look at verse 18. We'll start there. "For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent." Right? Because it's foolishness. The wisdom of this world, the prudent men of this world is what? It's just foolishness, right? And that's what was being taught. In the name of who? In the name of God. And he says, you got to stop this, and I will put an end to it. I will show them what wisdom really is. Plus, there was their arrogance. Let's go to Isaiah 29 again. We saw last week, as Isaiah mentioned to them, that their little deal, that they think that, hey, we're good. God's on our side, so we've got a deal. So nothing bad can happen to us. Nothing can ever happen. That's arrogance, isn't it? Because they weren't really serving the Lord. And look what he says here in Isaiah chapter 29, verse 15. "Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord, and their works are in the dark, and they say, who sees us? And who knows us?" Right? No. Nobody knows. That's the thing. How easy is it to put that coating over the top, to be that whited sepulcher, as Jesus called the Pharisees, that, hey, I'm a good Christian person. I'm a good, godly person. See, I do my sacrifices. I give my money. I do the prayers. I wear the coats. I got the right haircut. I say the right words. I look right. And say what? They'll never know what's really going on inside. Who always knows? There's two people that always know. You and God. Right? And it cannot be hid. Look at verse 16. "Surely your turning of things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay. For shall the work say of him that made it, he made me not? Or shall the thing framed say of him that framed it, he had no understanding?" The one who made us knows, doesn't he? He knows our inward parts. He knows our inward thoughts. He knows our motivations. He knows that we may hide. We may be able to fool this world, but will we ever be able to fool God? And that was going on. They had a nice sheen, didn't they? During the time of Hezekiah, all the way back to the beginning of Isaiah's prophecies. Basically, you have an Israel that on the outside looks pretty good, doing all the right things. Yet, what was in their heart? Did they really trust God? They really seek to do what is right, to do what is just, to help those in need, and to do what is right for those around them, and to truly love their neighbor and truly love God? No. But that was seen as secondary, right? As long as I'm doing those things, the rest of that stuff, who cares? And that is like the potter, or the clay, saying to the potter, you didn't make me. I made me. I know me. I'm always amazed at the number of kids. And this has come from kids, so I shouldn't be too amazed because kids are what? Stupid. And some of us don't grow out of it, unfortunately. That's why it's okay with kids. Of course, they don't know. But none of us say, I always ask them the question, who knows you better, you or God? And what will they say? I do. I know me better. I know what I need better. That is a foolish lump of clay. And that's what they are, and that's fine. Unfortunately, some people never grow out of that stupidity, do they? And he's saying, you think you're in control here, you are not. In fact, what does he say in Romans chapter 9? Again, Paul with the early church saying the same thing. Romans chapter 9, verse 19. Romans 9:19. Nine 19 says, Thou wilt say then unto me, Why doth you find fault? For who hath resisted his will? We're sinners, right? God made us sinners, didn't he? So why should he find fault in us? That is like the who? The clay saying to the potter, it's all your fault. Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, Why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? What is God? Willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with such long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction. It's up to God to do what he wants to, right? If he wants to punish, he punishes. If he wants to show mercy, he shows mercy. And we sit there and say, that's not fair. Well, lump, it's not for you to say. That's arrogance, isn't it? And they had an arrogance about them. We will decide what God can and cannot do, what he should and should not do. Why? Because we are God's people. It's like, no, he made you. And he can also destroy you, can he? In fact, that's what he said was going to happen. He says, I'm going to bring Assyria. And what will he bring? He will bring distress. He will bring upon a mount. He will come upon you. Assyria will come. And he's already warned them that as Assyria takes Israel for all of their sin, learn from them and don't go looking to Egypt for help. So what did they do? How many think they went to Egypt for help? Yes, they did. Why? Well, because this. Because they're blind, their heart is far from God, they're foolish, and they're arrogant. Yes, they're doing all kinds of great things on the outside. But are they truly trusting and loving and following and obeying God? The answer was no. So I'm going to bring Assyria, and they're going to come down. And did he, by the way? Yes, he did. But how many want some good news? If I was reading this, I'd want some good news about here. Let's jump back to verse 4. After he says, woe unto them, I find this interesting. After he says woe to them, he says, oh, by the way, I'm still in control, and they will not succeed. I'm going to distress you. I'm going to cause fear, and I'm going to cause pain, but they will not destroy Jerusalem. In fact, look at verse 4. And thou shalt be brought down, and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. However, you're going to get low. It's going to get hairy. And you're going to be looking, they're looking to Egypt, and Egypt's not coming. And things look awful. Things look like it's terrible. Verse 5, moreover, the multitude of thy strangers shall be like small dust, and the multitude of the terrible ones shall be as chaff that passes away. Yea, it shall be at an instant suddenly. In an instant, they will just what? Go away. He's prophesying that God is going to bring a powerful army to surround and bring distress and fear upon Israel and upon Jerusalem, and they're just going to go away. Why would that happen? Because who's in control? Verse 6. Thou shalt be visited of the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and great noise, with storm and tempest, and the flame of devouring fire, and the multitude of all the nations that fight against Ariel, even all that fight against her and her munition, and that distress her shall be as a dream of a night vision, here today and gone tomorrow. I find it interesting that he says that first. I'm bringing distress, but they're going to go away. And oh, by the way, I'm very mad at you. Because then he goes into all this stuff. You're blind, your heart is far from me, you're foolish and you're arrogant, but I am going to help you. And that's exactly what happened. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, sent his army down with General Rabshakeh, one of the great names, Rabshakeh, who comes and he gets the leaders to come out. The priests and stuff come out from Hezekiah to meet with him. And Rabshakeh sits out there and he yells at the top of his lung that their God cannot stop the Assyrians. Other gods of other nations and other cities, they have tried. And the Jews are like, wait, can you keep your voice down? And by the way, can you speak in a different language so the people on the top can understand you? Because you're scaring them. He said, no. I'm talking to the guy on the top of the wall. I want everybody in the city to know that we're going to come and your God can't stop us. So they take that back to Hezekiah. Hezekiah's like, that's problematic. I better talk to who? Isaiah. So he goes and he talks to Isaiah, and Isaiah says, don't worry about it. I've talked to God, and what has God said? They're going to be gone. They will not succeed. I promise it. The next night, an angel of the Lord comes down and wipes out the entire army of the Assyrians. Gone. Just as Isaiah said, just as God promised. Does that mean he's happy with them now, though? I think that's important to get this in the timing here. God says, woe unto you, and then he says it's going to be okay, but I'm mad at you. They were supposed to learn from this. What did God want them to do? The day the Assyrians were wiped out, what should they have said to themselves? We're okay? God loves us? I told you we were on his side? Or were they supposed to take it, okay, he said he was going to do that, but he also said that we're blind, our heart is far from us, we're foolish, and we're arrogant. So maybe we should start making some changes. And why do I bring that up? Because keep in mind, during the time of Jesus, what did he say about the people of his time? Which were doing the sacrifices, doing all this stuff, right? What did he say of them? Woe unto you. Destruction's coming. The Mount of Olives, where he gave his Olivet Discourse, he told them all about what is coming. It's going to be destruction. And oh, by the way, you're blind. Your heart is far from me. You're foolish. You're arrogant. What did he not say to them? Oh, and I will protect you. Instead, he said what? And when Rome comes, how are they going to come? They're going to destroy. They're going to take this temple, and there's not going to be one stone left upon another when they're gone. And what happened? Did the people learn? Did the people learn here? No, they didn't. Just looking ahead, no, they didn't. They really did not learn their lesson from the whole Sennacherib thing. That's why eventually where'd they end up going? Babylon. Because they did not learn. Same charges against them, they never really fixed it. And what about this time? Did they learn this time when Rome came and destroyed everything? Did they learn then? No, they still really have not learned, have we? And by the way, the same charges will come at the end too. And destruction will come again, won't it? But what does God say in chapter 29, verse 18? Is there still hope? Because what does he say? Something good is coming. Does any of this sound familiar? And in that day shall the deaf hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. There is coming a time, and when was there a time when somebody came and eyes were opened and ears were opened. The meek also shall increase their joy in the Lord, and the poor among men shall rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Is there any place where Jesus talked about the meek and talked about the poor? Sermon on the Mount. Where was he getting this stuff? This is all referencing back to Isaiah chapter 29. There's a day of hope coming. Verse 20, for the terrible one is brought to naught, and the scorner is consumed, and all that watch for iniquity are cut off, that make a man an offender for a word, and lay a snare for him that reprove in the gate, and turn aside the just for a thing of naught. And there is coming a day when God will defeat Satan, won't he? He will defeat the one who brings sin and temptation, won't he? And he will win. Verse 22, therefore thus saith the Lord, who redeemed Abraham concerning the house of Jacob, Jacob shall not now be ashamed, neither shall his face now wax pale. But when he sees his children, the work of mine hands, in the midst of him, they shall sanctify my name, and sanctify the Holy One of Jacob, and shall fear the God of Israel. They also that erred in spirit shall come to understanding, and they that murmured shall learn doctrine. There is coming a day when he will finish his work with Israel. There will come a time when that relationship will be restored, won't it? That day is coming. Is there hope? Isaiah is saying bad things are coming, but there's always hope in who? Does that mean everything's okay? We got some problems. And this is an important message for us too, isn't it? How's the church doing? There are a lot of church services today, a lot of giving today, a lot of music and words sung. A lot of people get dressed up. At least you used to. I don't know if they do that anymore. People all get together and worship together and things like that. Does that mean everything's okay? Not necessarily. Do we still have a lot of blindness in the church? Do we still have a lot of hearts that aren't right with God? Is there still a lot of foolishness where the things of the world or concepts of the world are taught as wisdom? Is there still arrogance? We're children of God. We're Christians. We're okay. We got it all under control. What does God say? I can bring destruction. I can also bring hope. What does he want his people to do? Why is Isaiah even telling this? Why did Paul and Jesus tell people at that time this? Because he wanted them to what? Change. And that's up to every single person in the church, isn't it? To say, hey, how are we doing? Destruction can be right around the corner, can't it? But there's always what? Hope. No matter how bad Israel was going to get, what does he say right here? There will come a time when Israel will be restored. There will be a time, God's got a time, he sent his Christ, he sent to do all those things, and there will be a time when it'll all be restored. But in the meantime, how are we doing? We cannot say, we can never say in our arrogance, well, got a lot of churches. Got a lot of people call themselves Christians. Got a lot of prayers. Doing a lot of good things. God, I will say it right here and right now, God does not care about that if the heart is not right. Where do I get that from? Isaiah. And Jesus. So I'm just amazed at the parallel between the times of Isaiah and the times of Jesus when it comes to the religious side of Israel, of Judah, of Jerusalem, of the leaders. They're almost identical. And they both almost met the same end. This time, God said, I'm going to save you. I'm going to blow away Assyria like the chaff. And he did. But when Rome came, he didn't do it, did he? Okay? So think about this. These parallels between the two. And just ask ourselves, how are we doing? Are we blind to the truth? Is our heart far from Him? Are we following foolishness and foolish things of this world? Listening to foolish things? Are we arrogant? As if we're in control even though we are the clay. What does God want us to do? Draw near to Him with a pure heart. A contrite heart He will never turn away, will He? So come to Him. Why do we do the things we do? Is it because you love Him? And are you trusting Him? Let's pray.